Assalamu alaikum, bons es, nangendef, y buenas tardes. I'm Marlene, and I am a mother of two beautiful daughters. I have a small business, and I'm a researcher and a writer. And I'm here today to tell you that there's a new trend sweeping across sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. In the agricultural field that's traditionally been managed by men, there's a new crop of women who are taking the decision-making reins into their hands, and they're starting successful commercial farms, family farms, and agribusinesses. And they're doing it profitably and sustainably, and they're investing in their communities. They're making a real difference. And I'm here today to tell you that because of them, the image of the female farmer that we typically see needs a facelift. Now, I live in Colombia, so I can talk about facelifts. These pictures of these beautiful women working in the fields and working on their farms are accurate in the sense that they capture a lot of really important hard work that women do. But they don't accurately capture all of these new women who are starting their own agribusinesses and growing them from $100 to multi-million dollars in a decade and impacting their country's food security in the process. Now, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background because I've been working with women like this over the past decade. How many of you have heard of NAFTA? Can you raise your hands, please? That's everybody. How many of you have heard of CAFTA and the DR? And there's a free trade agreement with Colombia as well. Now, how many of you have heard of AGOA? Okay, the numbers have dwindled. Well, AGOA is the African Growth and Opportunity Act. And it was passed, it's like a NAFTA, but with Africa, and it was passed back in 2000. And at that time, I was working for Representative Sokka Flashes on Capitol Hill, and I was charged with analyzing AGOA, also called AGOA, and competing bills. And I was told by everybody inside the Beltway how wonderful it would be if farmers in Africa could send their produce without paying tariffs under the African Growth and Opportunity Act to the United States, and how much it would impact their communities. Now, at the time, I was a young college student, so I was questioning everything, and I still do this. And I am also from a small farm in Pennsylvania. So I wanted to go to Africa and hear what those farmers had to say about exporting to the US for themselves. So when I told people that I was going to Africa to study business, they thought I had lost my mind. Maybe that means I'm creative, according to Mike's earlier presentation. So when I got to Senegal in West Africa, I went out to the fields and I saw women picking green beans, bent over in the hot sun, and I found the men who were managing the farm and making the decisions, and I asked them, I said, hey, how do you like AGOA? How's it working out for you? And he said, how do I like what? So I told him what the African Growth and Opportunity Act was, and he said, sit down, have some tea. And I knew, according to local custom, that meant stay a while, let's chat. So I stayed. That was 12 years ago. And over the past 12 years, working in sub-Saharan Africa, in about 23 countries, in the Caucasus, and most recently in Latin America and the Caribbean, I've learned a lot about trade and supply chains and sanitary and phytosanitary controls, which prevent pests and diseases on other countries' produce from entering our country and causing harm to American produce and American farmers. Now, I've also learned a lot about gender roles and what men and women typically do in these countries to grow and supply food. Did you know that 70 to 80% of all agriculture is manually done by women in the developing world, in the global south? Now, traditionally, it's true. Women, they plant the seeds, they do the weeding, they harvest the crops, they cook the food, and they serve the food. The men typically pick which varieties to grow and how to grow the food, conventionally using fertilizers or using organic fertilizers or no fertilizers at all, or organically, or what kind of methods that they're going to use. They determine which crops to sell and which crops to keep for themselves and where to sell it. Now today, there's a lot of new women out there who are taking that decision-making responsibility into their hands because they're not happy with the status quo of agriculture and food availability in their countries for them, for their children, or for their communities. So today I'm here to tell you that the image of the female farmer in the global south needs a facelift. So last year, I decided to conduct some formal qualitative research with the Global Gender Program at GW University. And we built case studies on some of these women who are successfully managing their own agribusinesses. And I had the privilege of interviewing these women. I have a long list of more women that I can interview. But today, I'm going to share a couple of their stories within the time limit that I have. We're going to start in Colombia, which is where I currently live. This is Iver Vargas. She lives in southern Colombia in a coffee-producing region. She's a bureaucrat turned farmer. Traditionally in Colombia, one of the world's largest coffee-producing countries, men grow the coffee. And with it, they earn the cash and they manage the cash. It's a cash crop. So a few years ago, the United States Agency for International Development started training women how to grow coffee as a means to empower them. And they helped form associations of these women in the coffee-growing areas. Iver attended one of these trainings and became enthralled at the possibility of growing her own coffee and making those decisions. So she borrowed 5 hectares of land, or negotiated 5 hectares of land from her husband who was growing coffee, and she started to plant specialty coffee. And she researched night and day what the markets looked like, how to connect directly with buyers, what the specialty market looked like as compared to the conventional coffee market, which is also very lucrative. And she went out and she trained her fellow coffee-producing women in her area and in 3 neighboring regions of Colombia on how to do this. She told me, before, women helped grow the coffee. Today, the associations have created a space for women to grow their own coffee. More broadly, this space has empowered them. Today, Ivar is president of Colombia's national chapter of the International Women's Coffee Association. And she's skillfully integrated the IWCA into the very powerful National Federation of Coffee Producers in Colombia. And thanks to her leadership, in 2015, Colombia is going to host the biannual meeting of the International IWCA. This is a big deal. This is Randa Fulda. She's in Senegal. Now, 12 years ago, when I was in Senegal as a Fulbright, I met her husband and her father, who at the time had a food processing company. And I told them about AGOA, and they were mildly interested, but they had a really good market in Senegal for their products, and they were fairly content with that. A few years later, the father passed away, and the son needed help running the business. And so his wife, Randa, quit her job at an embassy and learned to make jams and jellies and pepper sauces and syrups and juices and the gamut of tropical products. Within 6 years, Randa had developed a socially responsible export strategy to develop new markets. Her products today are in Europe, Asia, and in 200 stores in the United States. She's the first to export food, processed food, out of Senegal under the African Growth and Opportunity Act. Randa's growing. The woman's on fire, just like all of these women are. And what's more is that she's taking those profits and she's reinvesting them into her business. She's creating more jobs. She's hiring more people. She's provided full health benefits, which is not common in a place like Senegal, to 100% of her employees, 99% of whom are women. She's providing a market for fruit that would otherwise rot on the ground, and she's providing incomes for those farmers, bringing her the fruit. And she's developed an export giving fund where 1% of her profits from all of her exports go into an organization that supports education for disadvantaged children. Now, other women are seeing opportunities in their domestic markets as well. This is Dena Kapisa. She's in Malawi. She was a retired school teacher who lost her husband and had to support 10 children. So she took $133 of her savings about 15 years ago, and she opened a farm store in a rural area where she knew there to be a high concentration of widows like her. And she knew that these widows didn't have anywhere to buy fertilizer and farm inputs and farm tools. And they didn't have credit to buy them on because they didn't have a lot of money to start out with. She saw the need, she saw the market, and she opened one store. Last year, she earned $100,000 in revenues. She owns 4 stores, and this is in a country like Malawi where the annual GDP per capita is $870 a year, annual. And Dena's growing. Over to Ethiopia. This is the last story I have time to share with you today. This is Sokka Flashes. She obtained her PhD in Germany and moved back to Ethiopia when she had 2 small children, but she couldn't find organic foods for them, like she had an organic diet for them in Germany. So she started a company called Ecological Products of Ethiopia, Ecopia. She trained 11,000 farmers to grow organic foods all over Ethiopia. She started an NGO to provide them with credit so that they could buy processing equipment, so that the jobs processing the fruits could stay in the village. And she takes these fruits and processed sauces and grains and cereals and sells them across Ethiopia. She started a scholarship fund at the National University in Addis Ababa, where she motivates students to study food science and food hygiene so that they too can contribute to Ethiopia's food secure future. Now, these women that you see today, these are just a small portion, a handful of the women who are representing the new face of agriculture in the developing world, in the global south. They're challenging the status quo of the food systems as they were in their countries, and they're doing it profitably. They're doing it with or without investment, and they're doing it in healthy, sustainable ways for the community and for the land and the soil. So I'd like to dare you to rethink the image of women in agriculture in the developing world. I would like you to remember the faces that I've already shown you, as well as the faces of these leaders in agriculture and agribusiness across Latin America and sub-Saharan Africa. And I would love for you to recognize with me the new face of agriculture in the global south. Thank you.